Hello, and I messed it up. First hurdle. Okay, I got confused between my podcast intro and this intro. Right. Let me try that again. Okay, 3, 2. Hello, everyone. We're going to get back to the Friendly Fire tournament in just a moment. But right now, you are watching another in the GamePad Online creator industry interview series. And we are talking with people from the video games industry just to get a sense of their journeys and the work that they currently do. So right now, I am talking to the award-winning writer and narrative designer, Corey Brotherson. Corey, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm not too bad, thank you. It's a very flattering intro. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I have to, because when someone has won some awards, you've got to make sure you put that right up front, let people know. So we're not just talking to any storyteller, we're talking to the storyteller that's won some awards. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Before we get into it, I just want to let people know that you can share your thoughts, your feedback in the live stream. You can also join our Discord community and continue the conversations that we're going to be having here. And as ever, you can shout your feedback at us on social media, mayamada on Twitter and at mayamadatees on Instagram. All right, let's get to know Corey. So you've worked in a bunch of mediums, I see. So you've worked in video games, obviously. Children's books, which I might have to talk to you separately on that, comics, which I know because we met at a few comic conventions, and TV. And I also understand that you've worked on some game titles that include Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, and Dreams. You're also working on your own game, Windrush Tales, which we're going to talk about in a bit. So that's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that you do. We're going to kind of like pick that apart a bit. But I wanted to start with the sort of here and now, because earlier this year, I know you were selected as one of the 8 members, if I can say, of the London Games Festival Ensemble exhibition, and kind of in recognition for your 19 years of working in the video games industry. First of all, 19 years is a long time. I had no idea you were working in the industry for a long time. But how did that feel?
That was it was mind blowing, to be honest. I mean, I only realised what it was only a couple of years ago because my fellow writer Chella, who works on Windrush Tales, she was one of the selectees from, I think it was 2019. Oh, actually, yeah, no, you're right. It was the very first one. So, yeah, it was, and she was kind of like on social media, just kind of saying, "Hey, don't forget there are people applying for this." So I just thought, why not? I'd just kind of like see what happens. And I literally got an email
and put yourself forward for that.
Yeah, you can either put yourself forward or people can put you forward as well, and then you go into like a massive range of people. You just put yourself forward, man. Next one, just drop yourself in.
Okay.
And it was just like I got an email. I think it was in December, just kind of saying, "Hey, we've selected you for it." And I literally was just like, "What? How? Okay." So I told my wife, and she was just like running around like crazy. It's like, "Oh my God, how could this happen?" Sort of thing. This is amazing. So yeah, it was just an incredible thing to be selected, a massive honor, to have been selected for the final 8. And then, the experience itself was just absolutely amazing, really, just incredible people to be with, really inspiring as well.
Okay. Yeah, so that's like this year, but like, let us know how you got here. So like we said, so 19 years in the industry, and what has been your journey? So did you study for what you're doing right now? Did you go that route, or did you pick it up along the way? Did you always want to be in video games? Like, tell us how you got here.
It's a bit of a it was a fairly straight journey, to be honest. I mean, when I was 11 years old, which was a very long time ago, I realized I wanted to be a games journalist and a writer, like in fiction, because I read a lot of comic books, I read a lot of books. So really that was my goal. And then from that point onwards, I studied everything to go towards that. My careers counselor back then, I mean, we're talking in the 90s now, 1990s. He really didn't know what to say to me when I said I wanted to be a writer. So the ideal thing was just to put me in a bucket, which was general journalist. So what I did is I went and studied English language and literature at university. And then from then I went on and studied a diploma and master's in journalism.
Oh, wow.
And I was very fortunate in one respect to discover that one of the video game magazines that I knew about was actually based in Birmingham. It was a video game site called Games Domain, and they did like a paper-based magazine that they gave away for free in various video game shops as well.
So paper-based magazine? Wow.
Yeah.
So some of our viewers would be like really young, so they might not know, but there was a time where you can go to the shops and pick up physical magazines. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, it was like centuries ago now, really. But it was, it was a bit of an odd one. And so I joined them pretty much straight out of my degree. And I was with them for, I think it was about a year and a half. And then the site got bought by Yahoo. So, at that point, we had a choice. Everyone that was working for Games Domain had a choice, and that was to stay with Games Domain, but that meant moving from Birmingham to London, or alternatively leave the company. And I was literally the only person from my entire team that took up the chance to join Yahoo and move to London. Which was actually a nightmare, really? To be honest with you. It wasn't a great experience. I mean, I made really good friends there, and the people there at Yahoo were wonderful. But unfortunately, it was a case of like, they had this prestigious game site. And I say that because it was one of the very first video game sites that was actually ever created. And unfortunately, they ended up going in a direction which was the total opposite to what I was told we were going to go in. So I ended up just kind of eventually calling it quits. After a lot of personal issues as well, nothing to do with Yahoo itself, just very kind of personal grievances. And I went freelancing for a couple of years, and that's when I started to kind of do work for sites like Eurogamer and GamesIndustry.biz, and other smaller sites as well, and Game Central, which was, again, we're talking a while back. So Game Central used to be a teletext site when we used to have teletext on TV.
So magazines, now teletext, okay.
And I'm really showing my age, I know. So this is before Game Central became a fixture in the Metro newspaper and website, and then lots of places like that. But I also did freelancing for PlayStation. And one day I got fed up with basically eating noodles every single day because freelancing was hard. So I applied, a position opened up on PlayStation. My friend who was working there said, "Hey, we've got a position that opened up. We're in the late stages of interviewing, but I think you should go for it anyway because you freelanced for us for a year." So I went for it, managed to get it, and I ended up spending 12 years at PlayStation as a result.
They got you.
But yeah. They planted that V chip straight into that cerebellum, man. There was no escape. But it was a great 12 years. I made a lot of fantastic friends there, and I met my wife there. So, okay. I had a lot of opportunities that were. No, oh God, no, yeah. No. It's. I think it was in my vows,
Yeah.
So yeah, and then after that, I mean, during the 11th year at PlayStation, that's when I decided to go freelancing and work on my own game with Chella, with Windrush Tales. But ironically enough, PlayStation kept me on for another year, which basically led me up to only like about a month ago, where I left PlayStation and started working for King Games, which is where I'm currently doing work with them as a content producer / social media producer.
Cool.
But I also was picked up as well by a video game company which I cannot name because of NDAs.
Yes. Okay.
I'm working as a narrative designer and writer for them, which is exceptionally exciting. Hopefully I'll be able to talk about that later on in the year.
Nice. All right, that sounds really good. All right, so then you kind of like done a good job like catching us up. So I want to get into the Windrush Tales a little bit, but just like if you could clarify, what is the difference between a writer and a narrative designer? Like, what's the difference between those roles? Because if you're a writer in video games, can you automatically become a narrative designer, or is there something else that you need to be aware of for that role in particular?
Yeah, I think this is something that has been a contentious issue for a lot of writers and narrative designers recently, especially because people were trying to differentiate the difference. Personally speaking, I would say that if you have skills as a writer, and that is your stock in trade, it doesn't automatically make you a narrative designer. However, it does give you the foundation. How I can clarify that is that me personally, so when I started working on Windrush Tales, and when I started working for this new company as well, my role is basically narrative designer / writer. But what that means is that as a writer, I create characters, I create concepts, I create storylines. I do all the things that you would traditionally associate with writing. The narrative designer split is, from my perspective, is that you're thinking about these things, but also from the perspective of a gamer. So that means thinking about designing missions, quests for the game itself, and thinking about them from a narrative perspective. So you're not just thinking like, oh, okay, so you have a character and you want to do a character arc. As a narrative designer, your job and responsibility is to make sure that that character arc isn't just about the character, but it's about how the player integrates with that character. Right. How you're always thinking about putting the player first within that. When you're creating quests, it's not just about, okay, so this quest has X number of characters and the player interacts with them in a certain way. You have to think about, what is the player thinking about at that time? What is the player feeling at this particular moment in the game? What sort of gameplay elements and gameplay mechanics are you implementing in there? Are you looking to teach the player how to control the player at that particular moment in time? Are you looking to introduce certain non-player characters at that particular moment in time? Are you looking to introduce a new gameplay mechanic? How are you integrating the writing side of it with the gameplay side of it? And I think that is where the essential differentiation between writer and narrative designer come in. A narrative designer has to think about all these gameplay elements, while a writer doesn't necessarily have to think about those, but realistically they should. Yeah. So it does get very fuzzy and very blurred a lot of the time.
No, I get that. But yeah, no, thanks for clearing that up. I guess, you have to consider a lot more sort of different parts of the game, and like you say, the player experience also throughout the game and story. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So you mentioned the Windrush Tales video game, which you, I believe, co-wrote with Chella Ramanan. And let us know, like, so what is the game and how did that partnership come about?
So that was an interesting one. Basically, I think it was in my years, maybe mixed up now, maybe 2017, beginning of 2018. Chella, I met Chella through, I was recommended to her for a panel. I think that was back in 2017 at the time. And the problem that I had was I couldn't attend this panel because I was going to be on holiday. But what it was is that we just thought we'll stay in touch. Because Chella runs her own podcast and a site called Games Industry. Basically, after that point, she invited me on to be a guest along with her and her co-associate, Drew. And I was doing things like talking about Luke Cage and other bits of kind of media, as it were, as just like a podcast guest, essentially. And then one day, I think a year later, Chella just got in touch with me and said, well, how do you feel about being a co-writer / co-narrative designer for a game about Windrush? Because at the time, I think it was the 75th anniversary of Windrush. Right. So I said, yeah, absolutely. It's like, my dad is from St. Kitts, my mom's from Barbados. The Windrush generation is a big part of my own personal history, because my grandparents arrived here during, not on Windrush itself, but they came during that particular generation. And I sat down and with Chella and we started kind of like talking about it and mapping out ideas and really kind of trying to put that together. I mean, it's still a game that is in development. Basically, we've reached a point where Chella and I switched roles. She was freelancing at the time, and then she got picked up by Ubisoft Massive, I think it is, Sweden.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and which was a wonderful opportunity for her. So, but it was obviously a massive undertaking to suddenly pick up all your stuff and move countries. So that everything kind of got put on hold between her picking up her stuff and moving countries, and me actually leaving PlayStation and moving back to my hometown of Birmingham and going freelancing. So I was then having to kind of juggle my freelance work and make sure that I was keeping the lights on and not having to live off noodles again, while considering doing this work. So we've reached a point where we're both having to readjust our lives and kind of get things back on rails again. But it was something that is very important to both of us. And we do want to, see it through at the end of the day. And we've had a lot of interest from people as well from it. So that really helps inspire us and push us forward with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's because I used to be a software engineer and not in video games, but I understand the process and I know it takes a long time. It just does. And especially when you have to deal with, just like life, outside of that. So, all right, so I won't ask you for a release date. I will give you that mercy, but it is something that people at some point in the future can look forward to. All right, so we're gonna head towards a break to get back to the live stream. But before we do, I wanted to ask, what games are you playing right now?
Wow, that's a good question. So recently I started playing The Outer Worlds, partly for research as well, because I was looking at the way that they structured it. Yeah. It's kind of like actual research, but it's also research. I was looking at quest structure at the time and kind of like looking at that and analyzing that. But I like to just play anyway.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, I was playing Katana Zero as well quite recently, and what was another game that I picked up not too long ago? Talisman, because it was released on Switch, I think in May, and it's a big tabletop game, and so I started playing that just out of nostalgia, I guess, because I used to play it when I was like 14, 15 years old. So yeah, it was just a lot of games that I play. They're either usually out of a sense of nostalgia or a sense of work-related reasons, which helps with tax as well.
Yeah, I do that with comics as well. But anyway, we don't need to talk about that. And we're back here with Corey. So we're going to fire a few more questions at him for you guys who are watching in the Discord. And kind of leading off what you were just talking about in terms of sort of playing games for research, I always wonder when people work on different properties, like we mentioned Horizon, Spider-Man, and you were talking about Outer Worlds for research. So, like, do you usually like play the games that you work on, or do you find it's better to separate yourself, or how do you approach that?
So when I worked for PlayStation, my job was a content producer, which basically meant writing marketing material and creating ideas for each of the games that we used to work on. Not just first-party games, so not just the games that Sony created, but also the games that third parties like Ubisoft, Warner Brothers, Take-Two, Rockstar used to work on it as well. So it depended entirely on the sort of work that I was doing, the sort of kind of content I was creating. With some of the games, it was an absolute requirement that I played it. So, for example, Horizon Zero Dawn, when we had a press junket, I would go over to Amsterdam, where Guerrilla Studios were, and we'd play the game with the rest of the press and interview everybody and really get a feel for it, because in playing the game, it would help inform the interviews and the material that we're writing. When it came to third-party games, sometimes it wasn't necessarily to play the game all the time, partly because, like, for example, some companies, some studios are a lot more secretive about their game,
Yeah.
and they don't necessarily want to show you the game at that particular stage.
Yeah.
So you try to have a communication with them, and you try to work around that, as you were, and you research and you talk to the developer, and you kind of work it in the best way possible to make sure that you're informed. But if the game's not available to you, then there's only so much you can do. So it is a two-way street in that respect. But yeah, it does reduce the amount of times that you play the game as a hobby as a result.
Yeah. It's that ironic thing of when you're in the industry, you get less time to sort of take part in it recreationally. So
yeah,
no, I get that totally. So then, like with that in mind, and so some of my work involves sort of working with young people who are into video games or want to sort of find their way in terms of a career path. And something I see, there's a few things I see, and I'm going to ask you about a couple of them. But one of the things I see, like I ask what games they play. So, and usually what comes out is FIFA, Call of Duty, and Fortnite. Pretty much like guaranteed.
Yeah.
But and I always try and stress the importance of maybe playing games that are outside of your usual lineup. So for you as someone who works in video games, what do you think is the importance of making sure, if you want to get into the industry, that you're playing games that aren't just what your friends are playing or aren't just what you think you might already like?
Yeah, it's, that's a really great point, and I think it's not made often enough. It's like with anything. So when I wanted to be a writer, when I was young, one of the bits of advice I was given was to read widely. Not just the stuff that I liked, but the stuff that I'd never read before, the sort of genres that I may not be necessarily familiar with. And it's the same with games. So if you want to get into the games industry, it's within your best interest to play as many different types of genres, many different types of games as possible, from text-based adventures to full-blown, like open world kind of games, to sports games. As a writer, it's important, I think, for me to stress that even games like racing games and sports games have a lot of writing to them. So if you want to be in the games industry and you want to go in a specific field like writing, even having the experience of playing sort of sports games or racing games or other games that you don't necessarily feel that have a typical narrative can be actually really, really advantageous when you go into them and understand them and play them and really try to work out what makes them tick, what makes them work. Understanding the game from every single time perspective that's there, that is available to you. Having that wide scope and having that wide kind of sense of taste, I guess, regardless of whether the game is good or bad. Bad games can be just as valuable to learn from as good games. What not to do. Yeah, absolutely. When I was a games journalist, it was I played a lot of bad games, and I knew how to write about them because that was my job to write about them. But in knowing how to write about them from a journalist perspective, knowing what didn't work from a narrative perspective, from a gameplay perspective, from a presentational perspective, gave me an advantage in the sense of when I actually came into games and started working on them, I, again, like you said, I knew what to avoid, what not to do, what sort of thing would be valuable to work on, and what sort of thing would be really difficult or dangerous to push towards. So yeah, definitely, if it's great if you have a game that you love and constantly play. I play Don't Starve like non-stop. I'm absolute Don't Starve addict. Same with Spelunky. I love those games. Okay. I would happily live and die by those games. But I do work in games. It's important for me to get a wide variety of games that are out there across the entire spectrum.
Cool. Yeah. All right. I just wanted them to hear it from you, so it doesn't just come from me. Thank you for that. And sort of along the same lines of things for sort of young people who want to get into the industry to know. And to be honest, this one more so than the last question is just sort of for me. I want to hear it from you, but sometimes I'm in classes and I'll see so people have to write reports, things like that. I'm not naming any names, partly because I've forgotten, and also I don't want to necessarily shame anyone in particular, but I see a standard of spelling and grammar that is lower than I would like to see. So,
yeah,
like, please, this is again just for me, for like public service. Can you please just like remark on the importance of spelling and grammar, even in the video games industry? I'm sorry, I just had to do this. It's just the people need to hear this. Some people need to hear this.
Oh no, you are 100% right, and I am absolutely totally with you because
Thank you.
It's essential.
Yeah.
It's absolutely essential. It can mean the difference between someone picking up your CV and going, oh yeah, this person just misspelled something and putting it in the rubbish, to actually saying, okay, there's no spelling mistakes, there's no grammar errors on this CV. Let's take them actually and read the CV properly to see what their experience is. And it sounds like I'm being facetious, but honestly, I have read CVs. I've been part of the process of hiring people. It's super, super important, especially to a writer.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's honestly, it's so, so vital. Fundamentals it has to be there before you get anywhere else.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to hear. So if you're listening and this does apply to you, none of that text speak, proper sentences, use capitals. Anyway, okay, we're going to move on. I think I've made the point. All right, so we're gonna wrap up now. But I wanted to kind of touch on what's going on in the world right now. Not so much the pandemic, because that's one of the mad things that's happening, but the recent protests around sort of Black Lives Matter movement. And so I don't want to get necessarily into anything political, but what I have seen is it's kind of shone a light, to use that phrase, on I guess the lack of diversity in a number of areas. And it's things that we've known about. Certainly, I imagine sort of both you and I have known about. And with video games in particular, I've seen a couple of things. So, you've seen like companies come out and launch initiatives aimed at Black game developers. And even prior to that, I know the UK games industry put out a census that just looked at sort of areas of diversity and, frankly, the lack thereof. So from your perspective as someone who's been in the industry for so long, like, how have you seen the industry change from a diversity perspective, and what do you think still needs to be done going forward?
Yeah, great question.
Your best politician lifestyle, if you want.
Yeah, with the hand gestures as well. No, it's a fantastic question and super, super relevant, and not even just because of everything that's happening right now. I think it's one of those questions that is exceptionally relevant across the board. When I started the games industry, so this is like 2001, and I make a point of this as well. I was aware of not a single Black games writer at all. Now, I know for a fact I wasn't the first Black British games writer in the industry. I know that definitely is the case. I don't know how many other Black games writers were before me. I know they were there, but I wasn't aware of who they were, which is kind of shocking, really, when you think about it. And this was before the internet as well. So obviously there were certain magazines or what have you. But that goes to prove the point of like just how important this sort of thing is, because I started off and I maybe came across, in my first few years in the games industry, I maybe came across, I don't know, 4 or 5 Black people from here to Europe to the US.
Oh, all over total.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, seriously. It's ridiculous, really, thinking about it. And I mean, the only Black person I knew in the games industry when I was growing up, before I actually entered the games industry, was Oz Brown as a writer. He was a designer for Mean Machines, CVG, the EMAP kind of group, publishing group at the time. So I was very aware of that. And as I grew through the games industry, obviously I saw the games industry become more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of sexuality, in terms of race, everything. But it's still a relatively small corner of the entire games industry. I've seen more initiatives
where when you see a bit more of it, you realize how little of it there is. It's one of those things. Yeah,
absolutely. It really underlines it. And I've seen some great initiatives. Like when I was at PlayStation, one of my friends there, he's he was part of a smaller group that wanted to really make sure that Pride was represented in PlayStation. So that's when like Pride floats started being created, and PlayStation was specifically represented there during Pride Month and during the march. And I saw as well over in Xbox, they made very specific initiatives for black gamers. And it was just, I was just like looking at this and I was thinking, why have we not done this before? Why is this suddenly a recent thing? And then you come to the realization that, well, several reasons why. One of them being that the representation within the games industry was so relatively small anyway, that you kind of realize that a lot of people probably necessarily wouldn't want to I'm going to say this, it's going to sound dramatic, and I don't mean it to sound dramatic, but put a target on themselves.
Right.
In a level of like, oh, I am one of very, very few.
Yeah.
Do I necessarily want to put myself in a position which is suddenly going to highlight that, especially if there's things that are feeling uncomfortable within certain companies? PlayStation has been great and really supportive about any sort of initiative when it came to that sort of thing. I know a lot of other companies aren't necessarily the same. So seeing that and seeing that the way that companies have been changing over the years has been a real eye-opener to a certain degree. And personally speaking, I wish I had the courage to spur more initiatives while I was out there, because I didn't realize like that could even be a thing when I was doing it. When I started out, it was just like, okay, unfortunately, this is the way it's going to be. Hopefully things will get better. Yeah. And that is, I think, a way a lot of people have probably felt in the games industry back in the like early 2000s as well. Is you don't realize how many of you are out there, but you still want to hope that things will get better. But the only way things are going to get better is if the representation increases, so awareness increases as well. I mean, I was just a crazy young black kid that was like, well, there's very like one other black person in the games industry that I knew when I was 11 years old. I don't care. I'm just going to go for it anyway. But I know lots of friends. Yeah, it's just like, screw it. I don't really care. This is my passion. No one's going to convince me otherwise. But some of my friends were like, oh, I'd love to be in games writing or anything like that. But they were like, well, it's not seen as a viable route for a person, a black person or Asian person. And it was like, I can understand that, because there was no one out there to kind of prove otherwise. So it's so important to see this sort of thing. And I think current events have really underscored that level of importance.
Yeah. And
I have had conversations with friends in the industry where, yes, a lot of companies right now are going, hey, we haven't been as good with representation as we should have been. And there are two sides to that, where it's like we have some people going, our doors are open, send us applications. And that comes with a very dangerous misrepresentation of and dangerous illusion that, people of color and black people haven't been applying for those sort of jobs. They have. They've been turned away. I know for certain in the comic book industry, it's like people have been saying, you pitch a black book and some of the bigger publishers will go, yeah, it's cool, but it's not the right time, not the right time. So there is a dangerous thing where some companies have been coming, yeah, our doors are open. But I think the flip side of that is that some companies have been saying, yeah, we want to actually make positive outreaches and do work ourselves. It's like there are communities of us out there, and there have been for a very long time. Just search us out. You don't need to kind of say, oh, doors are open and just let people come to you. No, you do the work. Come and find us. And that's the way it should be. It's like we've been here for a long, long time. Yeah. We're not going anywhere.
Since teletext.
With the internet.
Been here.
Yeah, exactly.
Long time. That's a long time.
I know. Those pixels wouldn't, you didn't guess from the pixels, but we've been there behind those 4-color pixels for a long time. And it's good to see some companies kind of actually do the work. One thing I would say, and I've seen this from a few people that I've worked with, and even my boss at this mystery company as well, there is a very, very clear danger for this outreach to either dry up within a few weeks or a few months or anything like that when things are less current and less relevant. That's when you start to see people, whether they're sincere or not. And it's important that this isn't just a one-time thing. It's just like, oh, okay, so we're obviously noticing Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden we need to kind of actually represent. It's like, no. This is something that needs to be a permanent fixture across the board.
Yeah.
Just representation across the board. Obviously, we're talking about, Black at this moment in time, and it's obviously a very personal thing to me and yourself. But it needs to work across the board. It doesn't need to be just something that happens in a month and then no one talks about it anymore. But also, the thing as well is to be very, very careful of people just providing lip service and saying, oh, yeah, we want to do this right now and everything like that. And there's no real meaning behind it. Going back to the previous point where in a month's time, it's all been forgotten about. So, yeah, it's super important, and it's never been more important than now, where that support and that level of support is maintained and put there in the foundations to the point where it's no longer seen as an initiative. It's just day-to-day life.
It's practice. It's daily practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really well said, and I definitely agree. It's got to be, once the hashtag stops trending, like the work still needs to continue in a lot of industries. So I agree with that. So so we've come to the end of our little talk. Just before we sign off, just let people know where they can find you on social media.
So my name is. I've discovered over the years that my name is I am the only Corey Brotherson on the entire internet, which makes me very easy to find because I have a very unusual name. So I can be found basically, just to make life easy, on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you search for Corey Brotherson, you will pretty much find me just immediately. That is my handle across all of those social media platforms.
Nice and consistent. I like it.
Yeah, I try to make it as consistent as possible. Same with my website as well. My website is CoreyBrotherson.com. So it's just like, if you type in Corey Brotherson, you will instantly find me. It's a blessing and a curse, as they say. I'm the only one on the internet. No, nowhere to hide at all.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll share those links out when we put the interview. But thank you for joining me. And it's been really good to hear your journey and some of the work that you've been up to in the industry.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
No worries. So, let us know what you thought of that. Hopefully you're in our Discord, or you will join our Discord community. Share your thoughts, especially if you are someone who wants to get into the industry, and especially if you are someone who wants to get in the industry and needs to just up that spelling and grammar. I'm not going to let that go. We're going to be working on bringing you more interviews like these from people from the gaming industry. And if you are interested in hearing more of my voice for longer periods of time, you can check out our Story X Story podcast, where myself and co-host Tazzy talk about stories across pop culture, as well as video games, and basically give like storytelling tips and things like that. And you can see that at mayamada.com/storyxstory. For all things GamePad related, like I said, our Discord is there. You can also send us an email, gamepad at mayamada.com, and check out our website, our GamePad website, for more details on the next event that we're going to be doing at some point, and that is gamepad.events. So until next time, see you all later and stay safe.